Talk about food stamps and Section 8 and how people are abusing the welfare system.
I want to know, how do you get food stamps, but you got a new iPhone 7 and you got a new iPad, and then you pull up to your Section 8 house with a Lexus sitting on 24-inch rims with 2 holes and some dirty gold teeth? I'm confused. And then people claim they disabled and can't work, but they at the club every weekend, got their legs open every weekend. Oh yeah, I'm confused. Oh, I ain't done. So how you get food stamps in Section 8, but you got a monster truck with 70-inch rims, and you just bought a new Harley, and you always having a damn cookout and always playing beer pong every weekend? And some of y'all selling y'all food stamps, or y'all either spending $400 worth of food stamps on frozen snacks and Oreos, Doritos, and Cheetos. You ain't hungry? Go buy some meat, go buy some real food and feed your kids.
Well, good morning. This is Lou Benninger, and you're listening to Live with Lou. It's Saturday. For all you that are trying to figure out, we got this? Do we got it? All right. Oh, here we go. Our mic was twisted around. It's Saturday, and it's a nice day out there. Leon and I are here for 3 hours. If you're new to this, you're listening to the Patriot 1410 AM. Sometimes people call it KMYC, or you can listen at, what is it, 104.3? I think it's 104.3. So we're live today, and we're really live. In other words, we're not just recording it yesterday for live today. We're here. We're going to be here till noon. And you can call in if you want to at 530-742-5555. If you're out in the fringe area, we reach, I think, about portions of 5 counties. If you want to try a different method of listening, if it's scratchy or having to twist your radio around, you can go on our website at knycradio.com, knycradio.com, and go on to listen live and click on that, and you should be able to listen live stream. Hopefully it's working. If it isn't, give us a shout out. If you want to listen some other time, or you can't listen to all the show today and you want to come back to it, or you hear I said something and you want to catch it, you can go to YouTube. And once you get to YouTube, put in One Eye Blind Media, 4 words, all spelled out, One Eye Blind Media. That takes you to a YouTube site, and you can look at playlists and then click on Live with Lou and pick out whatever show you want to listen to. So we're out here in East Yuba County, so usually Yuba Sutter, good portions of Nevada, Colusa, parts of Butte, and Placer, parts of Placer, a little bit of Sacramento County could hear us. So you all have this similar problem going on, and that is trying to interpret the law on growing marijuana and what the state allows, what the federal government allows, and then what your county is going to allow, and then trying to get people to cooperate with the law. So laws are made. I think last year the legislature in California passed about 800 laws to 1,000 laws. So what they're counting on down there, people to actually obey those laws. I don't know whether you obey all the laws, but there's kind of a breaking in period. Remember when the seatbelt law came in, and then the law regarding your driving and your using your cell phone, driving and holding your cell phone to your ear or however you did it. That law came in, and now we have a law where you're supposed to attach your cell phone to something on your dashboard. That law's come. So then you had laws where you're strapping your kid in and then to a seat, and then you had laws where you couldn't strap them in and smoke at the same time. All kinds of laws, right? So there's been a difficulty. I'll just speak for Yuba County because I'm more familiar with Yuba County, and Yuba County's had a challenge because of some very large grows of marijuana in the foothill areas where it's easy to hide grows from the government and from thieves of marijuana. And so the supervisors in Yuba County over a period of years and a number of different supervisors have taken a shot at creating an ordinance that they felt fair and enforceable, and I think they've actually missed all three times. But in spite of that, large grows of marijuana that have, some people feel, over 1,000 grows have been installed, ignoring all the ordinances, absolutely all of them. And so recently, I think the tipping point on August 1st was the two sheriff's deputies that were shot, Bronson and Everhard, and they shot the felon who initiated the shooting, pulled a gun at I think almost point blank range, surprised them, and shot both of them multiple times before they killed him. It was kind of the tipping point for people that live in the hill area because they already felt intimidated. They felt like people were violating a variety of laws, environmental laws, fish and game laws, the law regarding growing marijuana. They were polluting with lots of chemicals, both fertilizers and pesticides. They were robbing electricity in many cases, stealing electricity. They were violating codes on use of streams, water. They were violating fire codes, and people were just nervous. You know, up in the foothills, when I hear sirens in Marysville where I live, and I see the fire truck and I smell smoke, I really don't worry about my house burning down if the fire is a couple blocks away. But in the foothills, if a fire starts, there's a good chance that you're at minimum going to have to evacuate, and you're liable to lose your house just because of somebody's miscue. And so when people come into the foothills and decide to be lawless, you're faced with the chance of, even though they may not shoot you, or you may not get caught up in a shootout over stealing of marijuana, they may burn the whole foothills down before it's over. And if you've been around Yuba County or these hill counties long enough along the Sierra Nevada, you know that once a fire starts, all bets are off no matter how it starts. So once on August 1st, just 19 days ago now, once the deputies were shot, it kind of sent people over the edge, where people said, this is enough. And they asked for a state of emergency to be declared because we didn't seem to have enough officers or deputies or code enforcement officers or any other folks to help us get a control on these outdoor grows, which were ignoring all generations of ordinances that have been passed in Yuba County. So basically what we have is mass farming of marijuana all over Yuba County. And so people are saying we need federal help. And the supervisors didn't okay that help, even though there's federal help for all kinds of things. But the supervisors didn't okay that. But this last week, there were 3 raids and arrests or actually I should say there were 3 raids and a couple of arrests. One was an interesting one. A guy named Tyler Nordland, originally from Portola, 29-year-old guy, bought himself a piece of property up on Charlie Lane, I think it was, and he moved in with a little camp trailer. There was no running water there, no electricity, no septic, and he just created his own little operation. He dug a pit to relieve himself in. He built himself a fire pit to sit around at night and warm himself. And he set up a butane lab, all kinds of things that were liable to catch the whole hill on fire. In fact, there was, when deputies and enforcement people went in, fish and game people, they found an area where it already caught fire and burned right up to his propane tanks or butane tanks. So they arrested Tyler, and Tyler was very bold. He told the people, his neighbors, according to a report I got from neighbors, that he bought the property to grow marijuana on, and that's what he was going to do. And since he owned the property, he had a right to have an open fire regardless of burn permit restrictions, and he could just do whatever he wanted up there. And so that's what he did. Now, that's what everybody is fearing in the foothills, is that it isn't about, when people show up at supervisors meeting, they talk about being ill, being in pain, and how marijuana is a relief. And so they give you the impression that what's going on in our community is that just a few people wanting to relieve a debilitating illness. But the fact is that it's far beyond that. And when we have a community or a society that becomes lawless, we got big problems. Because basically the founders felt that we needed government for 2 things. 1, to protect us from foreign invaders. And number 2, to protect us from our neighbor when they got out of line and their fist hit our nose or their chemicals polluted our ground. Now, that's unique. I have a friend that's a missionary in the hills of Thailand, out of Chiang Mai, about an hour and a half, and he has a neighbor that sprays toxic chemicals right near his property, and it's making his wife and him sick. And there's no rules on that over there. So they can get away with that. And so you have a neighbor that's doing something. It's just not extreme environmentalism. It's something that is toxic. It's poisoning the ground and the water and affecting their life. So they've had to actually move and build another house away from that, down on their property, down away from that property line. So what we do as neighbors can affect those folks next to us. Now, in the city, we're all really close, so you got to be careful. So they eliminate me having pigs in my backyard because they might, if it got stinky, it might turn off the people in the drive-through line at Taco Bell. You got that? But in the foothills, if somebody does a stupid and lights their property on fire, like through an illegal electrical hookup, stealing power, like I believe out in the raid out in Camp Far West, they arrested a couple who had a big grow going, and also their entire house, except for one room which used as a bedroom, had a grow in it, as well as a greenhouse. They actually were stealing electricity, from what I understand. So there are grows throughout the hills, and most of them are going without any kind of enforcement. Now, the effort this week with 3 grows being addressed, maybe that is a renewed emphasis by the Board of Supervisors, encouraging code enforcement and law enforcement and Net 5 and Fish and Game and all the folks to let's get it on. I don't really know. I don't understand it all. I know there's a limit when you have a couple deputies shot and you have people out on pregnancy leave and you have people injured, like the deputy that lives across the street from me, no sooner got trained and was out on the road, and he got into a scrap and had to do a takedown and broke his wrist or hand. And so he was out getting repaired. So that just happens when you're a deputy, because did you notice that not everybody, when you say you're under arrest, put your hands behind your, not everybody says, oh, by all means, right? They want to fight you nowadays. and maybe they've always been that way. So anyhow, we got a real danger. We have a danger in the Yuba County foothills that the valley does not have, and that is an extreme fire danger. Now, it's interesting. I ran into an article that I didn't cut out, but I can do it from memory. In Calaveras County, I think it was an Associated Press article, where people were so angry with the supervisors by not getting an ordinance and enforcing laws against renegades in Calaveras County, which again is Sierra Nevada foothills. They voted out all the supervisors that didn't seem very responsive and voted in a new batch. And now they're changing things up down there. Whether they get something they can live with, who knows? So that's the marijuana thing. Buck Weckman is been the leader of a group in the foothills trying to organize folks. And I appreciate Buck's efforts because people feel powerless. You know, Sheriff Durfer and District Attorney Pat McGrath both said if you look at the statistics on crime, there's less. If you live in the foothills, you're going to have less crime that down the valley. Well, it makes sense. It should be that way because a concentration of population is in Marysville, Oliverston, Linda, and Wheatland. So you should have more activity down here. However, they don't keep statistics on intimidation, fear, and harassment. They don't keep records on those kind of, or the loss of peacefulness living where you are. I was talking to a guy at the training zone one day, and he was telling me he did 20 years in the Air Force, and he spent some time at Beale, so he decided to retire here, and he bought some property in Oregon House, and he and his wife wanted to build a home up there, but he said with all the activity up there that I'm talking about right now, they decided to just not do that because they didn't want to move into that kind of conflict that was going on. So it's a real problem, and regardless of whether there's a lot of crime, you know, crime is an interesting thing. There could be a lot of crime, but nobody's doing any arresting. And if you look at Charlottesville, where Terry McAuliffe, the governor, told the police to stand down, there was a lot of crime that went on in Charlottesville with people beating each other with sticks, clubs, etc., macing each other. But nobody or hardly any people got arrested. So when you look at the statistics 10 years from now, you're not going to see many statistics, but did we have a real problem? Yeah, we had a real problem there. So you can have crime, you can have harassment, you can have intimidation, you can have unhappiness, but have no statistics for it. Like in my neighborhood in Marysville, I was talking to my neighbor across the street who's been there many, many years, and we were talking about how our neighborhood has changed since they introduced 14 Forward and since the city police have now they're not enforcing any anti-panhandling or, in fact, just recently they finally, after months of pleading with them, towed or cited or noticed cars. They put notes on the cars and trailers saying, if you don't move this, we're going to tow it. So they got towed, and now they're back again. And we on 11th Street between H and F, we have a truck and a camper. We're a camping recreational vehicle where people are staying in them right on the street. But nobody's doing anything about it. And even though cops drive up and down the street all the time, they don't seem to notice cobwebs and weeds growing up under things. So that's just the way it is in Marysville. It's all about leadership, isn't it? Whether it's your family, your business, your church, whatever you have, your organization, your club. It's all about leadership. And as leadership goes, so goes the group. And so in the city of Marysville, we're languishing. And the amount of people going up and down, it's not just people, but it's people that are, I would say, they're of questionable character, coming up and down my street and pushing carts with look like stolen goods in them and stealing CVS and Walgreens carts. So that's that. I want to talk to you about the Sutter Buttes Flood Control Agency, often called SBUFCA. And it's not Sutter Butte. It's not Sutter Buttes the way I just said it, like the Buttes. It's Sutter Butte, 2 counties, Flood Control Agency, which was put together, I think it was about 2010 or so, to rebuild and make safe the levee system all the way up the Feather River from Butte County on down through Sutter County. And $200 to $300 million is being raised, and properties, over 30,000 pieces of property are being assessed on top of property taxes. In fact, the assessment could be even bigger than your property taxes in some cases, to pay for these levees being built. And people voted for this after it failing twice. People voted for it primarily because they seemed to have an assurance that the money would be overseen by a community group. This isn't an unusual situation where it could be a school bond, it could be a 1% sales tax increase, where politicians say, listen, trust us, we're going to have a citizens or a community group oversee our work to guarantee to you and keep an eye on everything, that this money is being used efficiently, effectively, and exactly for what it was intended and not misdirected. Now, isn't it true that you've seen in government many times, many times? That's why we actually create these groups, because people have lost trust and lost confidence in government. Isn't that true? And we could sit here and spend 3 hours today quoting examples on how government has mismanaged money. They promised to do one thing with it, and then after you voted for it, and they bought your vote basically through campaigning and an advertising pitch and millions of dollars. They had no intention of using that money exactly as intended, or once they get the money, they come up with other good ideas, and while you're not looking, they spend the money elsewhere. Now, you guys have voted for 2 water bonds. I'll give you an example. I'm going to give you 5 examples, I think, here of why the government shouldn't trust any state agency or county agency without any oversight. And one of them is the water bonds that we've passed over the last, say, 6 years. 2 major water bonds, where bond means they go out and borrow money and taxpayers have to pay it back. And so those monies have not been spent for what they intended. So what? So what's going to happen is, coming up in the next election, you're going to get, some say, up to 3 or 4 more water bonds, because you're a soft touch for water bonds, because you vote for them because they say all the right things, and then they don't spend the money the correct way. I'm going to give you 4 or 5 reasons why SBUFCA is wrong in dismissing the Citizen Oversight Group.
Is a notion that somehow there are taxes on business and there are taxes on people. There has been a great deal of talk, and I use only the most recent proposals of President Carter for illustration, because this same kind of talk has emanated from every administration, Republican or Democrat. There is talk about how we're not going to raise taxes on people, we're going to raise it on business, on corporations. The most obvious example is with Social Security tax. Supposedly, that tax is half on employee and half on employer. But that's a fake. It's all paid by the employee. It adds to the wage cost of hiring a person. If an employer has to pay in addition to a wage, what is it currently? Close to 6% of the wage? Well, that's that much less that he has available to pay as wages in trying to hire somebody or bid somebody away from somebody else. But more fundamentally, businesses can't pay taxes. A business isn't a person. Only people can pay taxes. A corporate executive may write the check. He may sign his name to it. But who's paying it? It either comes from the customers or it comes from the workers, or it comes from the stockholders. Where else can it come from? Again, is there somehow some way in which some people can pay or some funds can be gathered with nobody paying it?
Today we're going to talk about school supplies. Just got back from the Walmarts and spent $350 per child on school supplies. I mean, I could go have dinner at the White House for less money, okay? My daughter's 11. She needs 2 4-inch binders. Have you ever seen a 4-inch binder? You could put a twin-size mattress in it, holds 60,000 sheets of paper. Now, what does an 11-year-old need with something that holds 60,000 sheets? Is she working for the Pentagon? Is she working on her thesis? Got a Quicken Loans job? What? All she's going to have is 45 sheets of diagram and sentences in there. Why do we need this? It won't even fit in a backpack. We're going to have to get one of those pods. She's going to have to take a U-Haul to school, okay? Don't get me started on these graphing calculators. They cost more than a fully loaded Kia. Not even kidding. And don't even get me started either on the folders with prongs aisle down at the Walmarts during back to school season. All right, it's like the hounds of hell have been unleashed. People are fighting over folders with prongs. Now, you can find the folders with pockets, but the pockets and the prongs, that's like striking oil. I saw a woman catch a felony charge over the last folder with prongs. She took it, picked out gorged out a woman's eyeball with the prongs, fighting her for it. It was like trying to get the last Tickle Me Elmo. What's going on with these school supplies, y'all? It cost a fortune. I don't think we're going to pay the light bill this month. How are we going to do our homework? How are we even going to find that 4-inch binder in the dark? Oh, we'll find it. We'll find it. It'll be like a piece of furniture in the house. Y'all hang in there. It's back to school season. God bless.
All right, you're listening to Live with Lou. This is Lou Benninger, and we're talking about why should you trust a government agency or a board or a commission that has no oversight. And the Sutter Butte Flood Control Administration, over a period of years, canned a couple people that they didn't like on the Citizens Oversight Board called CADAC, because they didn't like some of the questions and the way they were going about it. You know something? When I've been investigated by the IRS, or when I've been audited, like when we've had a CPA audit for some reason and something I was involved in, it's always uncomfortable, right? Because you got to go dig through stuff. You got to do extra work. You got to do this. You got to do that. But it keeps everybody honest. And so the Sabufka board decided, hey, this is just a pain in the rear to do something that we promised to do. And that was supposed to, well, let me ask you this. Y'all out there think you're all honest, right? Like I asked people in jail and at juvenile hall, I says, how many of you in here stole something? Everybody raises their hand. And I said, that makes you a thief, right? And how many of you have ever lied? And they raised their hand and said, well, that makes you a liar, right? So, but it's interesting how the Sabufka board thinks they're like, well, they're just like squeaky clean, like Mr. Clean. And they are just like totally reputable and like all honest and everything, and people of quality, character, and they don't need any oversight. When people say those type of things, that means to me they really need oversight. So I want to give you some examples of things where we got ripped off as consumers because people that we trusted to serve us ripped us off. So there's a guy that worked for CalPERS. He was the chief executive officer, Fred Buenrostro. And Fred, for some reason, decided to link up with an investment firm led by a gal named Alfred Villalobos. And Alfred and Fred, they started working together, and Alfred kind of got the corner on all the money that was going to be invested by CalPERS. And he dished it out then to various big money market firms and investment firms that was going to handle the California Public Employees Retirement System money. And then there were kickbacks from Alfred to Fred, who was the CEO. Fred wasn't getting enough money. Now, the current CEO of CalPERS gets over $750,000 and isn't even trained. He's just an attorney. He's not even trained as an investment guy. But Fred was getting kickbacks, and so what happened is the government, it went on for many, many years, and nobody caught it because nobody was providing any oversight. So eventually, somebody picked up on it, and they arrested Alfred Villalobos, and he then shot himself or hung himself. He killed himself. He actually, I'll be exact here, it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound, Villalobos. Alfred, who was a multi-bajillionaire by this time, his estate had to pay $20 million to settle charges of bribing officials of CalPERS, right? And Fred, he pled guilty to criminal charges for accepting bribes, and I think he went to prison. But Fred, I don't know why Alfred only had to pay $20 million. They think he made $50 million in commissions off Fred and Alfred working together. Isn't that interesting? Funny how people that are even really, really, really well paid still need more money. Now, the other thing, maybe you'll remember this. Do you remember Ruth Coleman? Ruth Coleman was the state director of parks. You remember that? And do you remember a fight over the budget where we're running out of money again, and it's all the taxpayers' fault? So they were putting the kibosh on lots of services, and the non-essential services are being cut. And so the parks director said, we don't have enough money to run the parks, so we're closing the parks. Do you remember that? They're going to close the California parks. And it was right at the beginning of summer. But then, lo and behold, the government somehow stumbled across money stashed in the California state parks budget. They found $54 million of unspent money in its accounts, and Ruth had not reported that money to the Department of Finance, even while claiming we were out of money. Now, she's a liar, right? And so she eventually, in 2003, stepped down, and the department's second in command, acting chief deputy director Michael Harris, he got fired. Now, how often do you ever see a government employee get fired? Not very often. So the next one is Janet Napolitano. Janet Napolitano is head of the University of California University System, the college system. And so she used to be the director of Homeland Security under Barack Obama, President Obama. And so after she left the Department of Homeland Security, the UC system hired her. So one of the amazing things in colleges throughout the United States, and particularly in California, is tuition continues to go up. Even after Governor Brown pleaded with the college students to vote for tax increases and promised them that there would be no tuition increases, they got tuition increases anyway. So right in the midst of Janet Napolitano raising tuition again on UC students, there was a state audit that had begun on the UC system, and she tried to sidetrack it. She tried to put the kibosh on it and tried to evade it illegally, criminally, and the audit found $150 million stashed that she wasn't reporting to the auditors. She didn't want to tell them about it while she was raising tuition. Now, that got people's undies in a bundle as well. Now, I don't know whether you remember this guy. This guy, you remember John Beale of New York? Well, John, he's the guy that came up with some of these really egregious EPA restrictions, Environmental Protection Agency restrictions, that really cost business a lot of money, all these carbon things, right? But John, it was a really interesting guy. He cheated the government out of nearly $900,000. For you and all of us, that's almost $1 million. And he did it by lying, such as claiming to work for the CIA while he was employed by the EPA, but he but he said, really, he told his employers, I have a special assignment from the CIA. I can't really get into it. So he skipped work for 2.5 of his 13 years of service, while all the time claiming to be working on a project for the CIA. I'm not making this up. Just Google it and read it for yourself. And so at that time, he cheated because he just stayed at home and watched Oprah and stuff and read books and had his tea and coffee. So about almost $1 million. Usually these, what they find, like in any embezzlement, what they find is usually far less than what was stolen, right? Beal's ability, it says, to dodge work and still get paid bonuses raised anger among lawmakers who questioned the EPA's oversight performance and prompted reforms at the agency. Beal pled guilty in U.S. District Court in September to theft of government property. Beal will have to pay $886,186 to the EPA in restitution and forfeit another $500,000, according to the Justice Department. And he went to prison. So, wow, these are the top people in our government, state and federal. Isn't that something? Now, let's talk about local stuff. How about County Administrative Officer Jim Arkins? Remember him? That was the guy that the supervisors, after they praised him in the Territorial Dispatch and criticized an article I wrote about him, then they turned around and refused to give him another contract, to extend his contract, and he sued and lost. He sued the county and lost. But one thing that came to the attention of the media was that he went out on behalf of the county and got a $10 million loan to put in, I think it was called a Chevron loan, to put in a solar panel project in the county of Sutter to cut down the tremendous, egregious rip-off costs that PG&E was charging all of us, including the county. So a good idea, going to have some solar, right? But he took this $10 million loan, and because of the history of the difficulties and not wanting any oversight, they don't want any oversight in Sutter County, so they just said, screw the auditor controller. That was Bob Stark at the time when they began this loan. They said, we're not even going to talk to Bob Stark. We're just going to keep a separate set of books right over here at the administrator's office, and we'll manage this $10 million loan. In other words, we'll get the money, and we'll pay it out for the different solar implements, the solar panels, all the framing, pay the contractors, all that stuff. We're going to handle all that income and outgo right over here in the administrator's office. Well, that's actually against the law. Every requirement of the county to pay any money has to go through the auditor and treasurer. The treasurer actually cuts the check, right? And so, but they just skipped that because they didn't want any oversight. And so Jim Arkins pulled off this all on her own with the blessing of the supervisors. Now, without any oversight. So eventually, you know how it was found out? An outside CPA audit of the county, which occurs every once in a while, saw how this money was being handled and blew the whistle, threw a fit about it, and reported it to the new auditor controller, Nate Black. Okay, so let me give you another example. And actually, in the previous show, I think they actually alluded to it, talking about CalPERS. And it was back in 2004 when Larry Combs and the supervisors and the department heads all wanted to give themselves raises. And they wanted to raise their pensions. But they realized when they were starting to do this that it was illegal to raise their own pensions without raising all the employees' pensions. So what they did was, instead of properly informing the public and printing out and figuring out and printing out and presenting actuarials, that means showing what these increases were going to actually do to the budget and the impact upon the taxpayers. They're supposed to actually have a public hearing and show all that stuff. Instead, they they put this increase, a 35% increase, retroactive all the way back to the time of people's first hiring. They put it through on a consent agenda. So a consent agenda is right at the beginning of the meeting. After they do the Pledge of Allegiance, and if they pray, they pray. And then they'll have a bunch of items on the consent agenda, and they'll say if everybody agrees to all this, everybody being the supervisors or city council, then they say, yay, amen. Or if they don't, they can pull stuff out. But they said, yay, amen. Well, Bob Stark, as Nate Black said in the show previous to this, Bob Stark said this is going to cause major problems in Sutter County. And they blew off Bob Stark, said, you're bad, nasty. We hate you. You're an idiot. You're stupid. And we don't like you. And we're going to try to destroy you because you're exposing us ripping off the taxpayer. He tried to do his job, and they carpet bombed him politically. So this is another example. And today, I think Nate Black, the last time he told me, it was that instead of a surplus back in 2004, we now have a $150 million debt in Sutter County because of this one act of Larry Combs, the supervisors, which the supervisors, there's two of them are still remaining on the board, Jim Whitaker and Larry Munger, deceived the people of Sutter County. And today, that $150 million debt or bill should be their bill. Now, the final one I want to mention is that the state auditor a few years ago determined they were doing an evaluation on Caltrans. And so they came up to the conclusion that Caltrans had all kinds of employees that were unneeded. They didn't have any work to do. You know how you guys that hang out in Marysville, have you seen people like small groups of people? They're not gangbangers. They have their pants all tight and everything, and they have little badges hung around their neck on these little lanyards, they call them, little pieces of fabric. And then they have a badge at the end, like a little square ID card. Well, those are Caltrans workers, and usually walk around. They're clean-cut guys. They're not tatted up and everything, and they're all walking around downtown Marysville. Sometimes they have a cup in their coffee, and sometimes they're working on their looking at their phones, walking up and down the street. They're taking breaks. Well, the state auditor determined that there were, there's like 20,000 of these guys, Caltrans workers, right? They thought 3,500 could be eliminated, and we wouldn't even miss them, right? Do you know what happened as a result of that? Nothing. So basically what we have is what I call blue-collar welfare, and then we have white-collar welfare, and this is what we call white-collar welfare, but it just costs lots more money. Instead of like $800 a month or $600 a month, it's costing like $10,000 a month, $9,000, $8,000 a month for Caltrans workers, particularly if they're engineer types. So when you stop to look at, I could just go on and spend the whole 3 hours on incidences where government is stealing the taxpayers totally blind. Now, Sabufka is building levees. Now, I feel good when I see those big piece of equipment up there working on those levees, because there was water during this last storm season. There was water, whether you realize it or not. No levees actually broke, but there was water coming into downtown Yuba City along that river levee, and it was dribbling alongside businesses, percolating up. That's a bad sign right there. So we're all for building better levees if you want to remain around here, because we know we're going to have high water. That's just a part of the life here. But the question is, do people handle all their business honestly and with integrity? And the problem is they don't. That's why you need oversight. In other words, what the Air Force says, in God we trust, all others we monitor. Or as someone else told me one day, Lou, whatever you expect, inspect. Let me just say that again. Whatever you expect, you inspect. And to expect Jim Arkins, who was the administrator, or the Board of Supervisors to critique themselves, well, that's just stupid. You got a stupid spirit on you, right? or to inspect the EPA. You remember that gal McCarthy? I can't remember her first name. She was the head of the EPA. She just had the stupid thing written. This guy, John Beale, was one of the top guys in the EPA, and she thought he was working for the CIA. Isn't that stupid? And ripped off right under her nose. Stole $1 million. How about that? And so you can just go on and on. How about Janet Napolitano, who always looks retarded when I see her? I don't know. I guess she was an attorney or something before, or a prosecutor. She stashed $150 million. What kind of arrogance and ego? Or Ruth Coleman, who stashes $54 million of unspent money and closes parks and jerks people around. What kind of people are these? So when people get all high and mighty with Sutter Butte's flood control agency, I'm not criticizing engineers. I'm not criticizing the guy up there on top of the levee running that Caterpillar or that big earth mover. What I'm concerned about is whether the money would be handled in the same way if a farmer and a businessman and an accountant were from the city was looking over their shoulder every move they make. Now, it was interesting to me to read what Elaine Miles said, where she said that right away after the starting of Sabufka and KDAC, that's a citizens group to oversee it, the Sabufka employees wanted to all fly, a bunch of them wanted to fly back to Washington, D.C. and spend $80,000 of this assessed money that you and I paid. If you have any property in Sutter County, I'm just involved in a church, but we had a huge assessment because we had a lot of property over there and a lot of buildings. And we pay a massive assessment for us, I mean, in our budget. And so to see then employees right after the money starts coming in say, well, we want to fly back to Washington, D.C. and lobby for lower flood insurance costs. Well, I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea to get flood insurance costs down, but that's not what the money was. The people were told the money was to rebuild those levees, right? To stop the things from leaking and boils from coming up and from a breach happening. So KDAC did just exactly what it was supposed to do. You know, when somebody calls you on something, you know, nobody likes to be, even people in baseball, when they get called out, sometimes they think they're safe. And so they argue the call, and it's uncomfortable. And sometimes they get thrown out of the game. So it's never comfortable to be called on something you think is a good idea. And so when they're called on it, people get hurt feelings sometimes. So when they called them on the $80,000 to take a junket back to Washington, D.C., then they reduced it down to $10,000, according to Elaine Miles, who used to be a state auditor herself. And then they just dropped the whole thing. Well, that's good. That's exactly what a citizen oversight committee is supposed to do. Now, I don't know what all the other details were, but there was a comment made by Miles that there were other issues that KDOC brought up that also instigated other changes. Now, that's a good thing. So what happened is Sabufka began to thin out the ranks of KDOC, and then people weren't replaced. Now, here's the other thing that I get a kick out of government. And whether it's supervisors or city council or agencies, when they say that they're all into transparency and how anybody can just ask anything, honestly, man, I have a heck of a time trying to get information from government. Sometimes they call you back. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just say, well, we can't give you that information, right? And so when these government entities said they're going to have a meeting at 9 in the morning, at 10 in the morning, at 1 in the afternoon, you know something? You know who attends those meetings? Usually other government employees or people that are on the government dole, right? They're being paid somehow by government. Maybe they're on some agency, Or maybe you find some people are 70 years old and they're retired. Even retired people are busy. I had a city council person criticize, made a cheap shot comment about Buck Weckman because when they canceled the lawful appeal hearing that he had applied for, when the city of Marysville canceled it to avoid his appeal and change their ordinance, then the city council person criticized him because he already had plans on another date that they wanted to move it to. And he said, well, I can't do that date because I'd already had plans to be out of town, and I fulfilled my original lawful date, and you guys canceled. So this city councilman, Chris Pettigo, gave a cheap shot at Buck Weckman because, he's retired. Well, retired people are busy too. My point is that during the day, people are very busy. Mothers are taking kids to school, and sometimes fathers, but usually mothers are taking kids to doctor's appointments, school, and trying to get to work. And people just can't take off work. You can in government. You can even call in sick when you're not sick. Did you know that? I call that a lie. But, in government, that's just, we just ignore that. So Sabufka says, well, we're going to have these meetings during the day, and occasionally might throw in one at night just to really meet all your needs. We'll be right back.
My friend.
All right, Lou Benninger here. We're talking about how government tells you one thing, does something else. It's a problem. And unless you're paying attention, and unless you have time to go to boards of supervisors and city council meetings, let alone agency meetings, you just get taken to the cleaners. Now, I was just I was looking through my stack here, and I ran across this Calaveras County article where it says, in Calaveras County, residents are deeply divided over the county's year-old decision to permit medical marijuana farmers who pay $5,000 application fees and pass background checks. Marijuana foes, opponents, said the county's new ordinance has attracted, here's the problem, a large number of undesirable drug dealers, leading to higher crime and community upheaval. Look what they did. 4 of the 5 supervisors who enacted the pot ordinance last year have been replaced by candidates who vowed to repeal the ordinance and ban all marijuana operation. And then that's even leading to problems. Now, I want to give you another example. The city of Marysville claimed that they needed a 1% sales tax increase to keep police and fire, which was a lie. They could have eliminated the police, saved $1 million, and hired the sheriff's department to do the same job and save $1 million. But they wouldn't tell the public that. In fact, they wouldn't even ask the sheriff's department to give them a quote, because then it would be public and it would show the huge amount of waste in duplicating the sheriff's department 50 feet across the street with a police department nowadays. And so they convinced enough people, because they went to a developer and big property owner in the area, David Lanza, and they convinced him, because the city council could not fund that proposition to raise the sales taxes by 1% to 8.5. They convinced this developer, who eventually then would get his building included in a dispensary. They convinced him to give money and fund that proposition, which he funded and hired a PR firm in Sacramento to do all the mailings and fancy brochures. And so they won the proposition. To me, they didn't violate the law, but they ethically violated the law, and it ripped off the consumer. The city council, when it puts things on the ballot, is not supposed to take sides on the issue and use the taxpayers' dollar against them. But essentially, they did that anyway. So you can't trust them. They're liars. And so recently, I think I may have mentioned this last week, Cal Water was praised by Silly Willie Simmons, city councilman, as being so wonderful to invest in the infrastructure of the pipes, the water pipes, and the water system of Marysville. And he just praised them and thought they were such wonderful people when they've done the exact opposite. They're doing the exact opposite. And they bragged about replacing 600 feet of old line that was maybe 70 years old with new line, 6-inch line, and how wonderful the pipe was, that it should last at least 80 years. Well, that's great. But I thought, it's just 600 feet. And I got to thinking, at that rate, I wonder how many years it would take to replace all the pipe in Marysville. It's a good math problem. Maybe Marysville High School should take it on. So I found that there were 55 miles of pipe in Marysville. So I divided 600 feet into 55 miles, and I think I got around 200. Well, let's see. I came up with the amount of feet, 280-some thousand feet. And I found out by dividing that out that it was going to take, at that rate, 600 feet a year. And you might say, well, Lou, what if they replace more pipe? Yeah, they have replaced more pipe. I've never seen much more than, say, 1,000 or 1,500 feet of pipe. Not very much pipe, right, when you're wanting to replace 280-some thousand feet. I figured out the number of years it would take, like they took over the system in 1930, but some years they don't replace any pipe. They just don't, unless it blows up or something. It's going to take over 480 years to replace the pipe, all the pipe in Marysville. Now, the old pipe, which they talk in this article, is cast iron and one other type, galvanized steel. So they say it's almost reached. It says Cal Water plans to replace 70-year-old pipes in Marysville. The cast iron and galvanized pipes have almost reached the end of their useful lifespan. The question is, and they won't answer that question, is how many miles of 70-year-old pipe are left to replace, and how soon are they going to get to it? Because they say they replaced 600 feet as a part of Caltrans's work around town recently. And they say because they replaced just 600 feet, they're going to raise our rates from 2019 to 2022. Every 3 years, the California Public Utility Commission, or CPUC, has to be lobbied by them to argue for new rates. And they're always asking, they never ask for less rates. They always ask for higher rates. So Silly Willie Bill Simmons, he praised him. Now, before Willie Simmons was elected, he was really against the high water rates in Marysville, which are 3 to 4 times as much as Yuba City, Linda, or Oliver's rates. He was really against it. He was also against a 1% sales tax unless it was specified in the ballot measure that it would go specifically toward a specific purpose, like maintaining fire or whatever. But he went back on that as well. See, these are the reasons you need oversight. Now, what you hope for when you have like in Yuba City, Linda, and Oliver's, you have municipal monopolies. In other words, the taxpayer technically is in charge. In other words, if they want to raise the rates in Yuba City, Linda, or Oliver's, they're supposed to go, I think it's called the 218 proposition. They go to a vote of the public. But in Marysville, your watchdog supposedly over Cal Water is supposed to be the city council, but they're in bed with them because the city council members in Marysville, if you give them a tuna sandwich and a cup of coffee and tell them how nice they are, they're a cheap date. And so, and then what Cal Water does, very deceptively says, listen, we just can't change our rates. We gotta apply every 3 years before the California Public Utilities Commission, CPUC, and they are very rough on us, and it's a very difficult process, and it's really hard. They hold our feet to the fire. That is all just 100% lie. They actually pay people off. Some of the people they have working for them have big connections. Sometimes CPUC members leave the board and go to work for the very people like Cal Water or Pacific Gas and Electric or Southern California Edison and or San Diego Edison, whichever it is. They just move places. They move from one utility to the place that regulates utilities. That doesn't sound right, does it? And they all go to the same parties. They go on cruises together. They're not supposed to even, if you email a CPUC member, you're supposed to email all of them. So all of them sees the same thing. No side deals, but that's not what they do. That's not what they do. And PG&E's got caught with their hand in the till more than once and claiming, oh, yeah, we need this raise to replace pipe. Then nobody goes and checks and see if they replace the pipe. Again, we're talking about monitoring what people say they're going to do. What people say they're going to do. And what's going on behind closed doors. Do contracts get let properly? Do people get overpaid for their services? Do people work hard for their services? Are agendas prepared properly? Are votes taken legally? Is there a violation of the Brown Act? All these things are important because the Brown Act was passed to encourage decisions to be debated and made in public, not behind closed doors and then come out and take the vote like they were just thinking about it right then and decided upon it. It's just like that 35% increase in 2004 for CalPERS that Sutter County did. That decision was made behind closed doors, and then it was just put on the agenda and passed swiftly with a consent agenda. Totally illegally. Ripping off Sutter County residents. So, there you have it. So, obviously, everybody has been listening to the riots, and, Barack Obama and Eric Holder, his attorney general, planted seeds of riots and fanned the flames of racism for 8 years, and now we're actually getting a crop. We're getting a harvest. Do you ever remember Barack Obama criticizing Black Lives Matter or any black hate group? Do you ever, people are saying Trump didn't do enough to criticize the white extremists. Do you ever remember Barack Obama? Do you ever remember Barack Obama criticizing the police before he even knew what was going on? Yeah, a lot, didn't you? Do you remember Barack Obama? You remember the guy that shot and killed 5 police officers in Dallas? Do you remember him making a quick statement on that? He didn't, did he? Over and over again. In fact, the first thing that Eric Holder, I'll never forget this, because I was wondering, how's this new administration going to work? Obama and Holder and all those people. The very first decision he made, which caused the resignation of one of his attorneys, was that some Black Panthers who had been intimidating voters, I believe it was in Philadelphia, right at the polling places, they were accused, tried, and they pled guilty to just that, and they were waiting for the final sentencing. And when the change in administration happened and Obama and Holder came in, they dropped all charges against the Panthers. Now, I want you to think about that. So what's happened is Barack Obama and Eric Holder has been fanning the flames of this for 8 years. And I wanted to, actually, I'm not get to, hopefully I'll get to it later. But I just want to give you some perspective. Because this left, what they call, some people call it Bolshevik, communist, socialist. It's also called fascist. Those would be all people on the left. They want to accuse people on the right of being fascist, but fascists are actually socialists. Hitler was actually a socialist, fascist. These people are being funded. These people aren't leaving their job at Intel or Google or Yahoo and coming down and protesting. These people are funded by George Soros, Communist Party, etc. And after 6 months, one person wrote, after 6 months of organization and promotion, the largest white supremacist gathering in decades drew only a few hundred folks. This all started in Charlottesville, which is a very beautiful city, very historic city. It has a city council and mayor that are wannabe Berkeley city council mayor, and they began to debate taking down this Robert E. Lee statue. And so people that didn't want it down were going to protest it. And so the fight is on. So Sunday, 52 million Americans, it says, went to church while a few hundred people beat each other up. 52 million went to church where everyone was welcomed and they all drank of the same cup, referring to communion. 62 million Americans volunteer in any given year, and 83% of American adults give to charity. In other words, most people in the country, regardless of their political persuasion or ethnicity, or even their view of the past, go to work, take care of their families, pay their taxes, and realize life is not tidy or perfect. It also says here 145 million Americans went to work today, where people, as I just mentioned, made life work in their community. That's something to just hold on to in terms of when the press makes it seem like, in fact, CNN's even been caught staging their own protests. Now, when you talk about removing a statue of somebody from our history, whether you like them or not, it's important to remember a few things. One, do the people, like, for instance, the woman who climbed up on that statue and hooked a rope around it, Robert E. Lee, she is not just a communist sympathizer. She's involved in the Communist Party, and she wants to overthrow this country. It isn't about a statue. For these people that are rioting, it's about wanting to overthrow the very values system and the nature of this country. So I want you to think about this. In Fremont, Washington, not California, but Washington, it's a suburb of Seattle, there's a substantial statue of a guy named Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin, I actually went to his tomb and in Moscow when I was there right after the fall of communism in Moscow. Lenin murdered by starvation 5 million Ukrainians in just 1 year. Millions and millions of people. That was just 1 year, one people group to get control of the Ukraine, which was a separate country that Russia took over to make the Soviet Union. They took over all kinds of countries. So Lenin's bronze statue stands boldly in tribute to him in Seattle, Washington. But nobody's tearing that down. It's interesting, isn't it? There's more to this than Robert E. Lee. Let me just tell you a little bit about Robert E. Lee, because you might just think of him as a famous military leader from the South, but he actually was married to George Washington's granddaughter. And he worked with Ulysses Grant, who was a military man from the North, and credited with leading the win from the North. So Grant and Lee worked together during the Mexican-American War and Lee became a decorated war hero defending the entire country of the United States, not just the South. Lee also believed that slavery was a great evil, and his wife actually broke the law back then. You might think this is nothing, but it was something back then. She broke the law by teaching slaves to read and write. That was against the law back in those days. You know, it's interesting when you judge people's behavior back then by what you do now, and a lot of what you do now is stupid. And it will be judged stupid by future generations when they look back and criticize your stupidity. After the Civil War, Lee worked with Andrew Johnson's program of Reconstruction. He became very popular with the northern states, and the barracks at West Point were named in his honor in 1962. He was a great man who served this country his entire life in some form or the other. His memorial is now being called a blight by socialists and communists, primarily. We're talking about a minority group of people. We're talking about hundreds of people that have come to inflict physical damage on people and tear down stuff. It's interesting now that the liberals in the country never will criticize the left's use of violence and force, no matter what they do. Blow up stuff, tear down things. If you look at a photo of what ISIS is doing, tearing down their history, and the left is doing, there is no difference. People say you can't change history. Actually, you can. You can look at the book burnings of the Nazis and the communists, where they burn every trace of other beliefs and philosophies and ways of living, so people will never remember them. Maybe the people right now will remember them, but their next generation will lose that history. I have friends that are Mexicans. Their parents speak fluent Spanish, and the Mexicans, my friends, some of them speak no Spanish at all. They learned beautiful English. They speak with no accent at all, but they lost their native tongue in one generation. You can lose your political and values moorings in one generation. ISIS tried rewriting history by destroying artifacts all over the Middle East. Is that what we want? I'm gonna go through some of the places that should be removed if that's what you want. It's interesting to me that I have friends that have gone to Germany and gone through the Holocaust areas that Germans should have torn down all that Auschwitz stuff and everything, and just because it was a blight on their history. But they actually have it. They want to know their history and know where they came from. No military veteran and highly decorated war hero should ever be treated in such a way. It's interesting to me because many of my friends fought in the Vietnam War. They knew little about Vietnam. They knew little about the cause of the Vietnam War. They were just 17 years of age when they had to sign up. And many of them were in Vietnam before they were 19. And they went because of their duty to the country, and they didn't know the cause. And when they realized, some of them realized the way the war was being fought, they didn't like the way the war was being fought, but they were mistreated when they came. But they weren't necessarily anti-Vietnamese. It's the same thing with Robert E. Lee. Many people are conscripted into the North and South, and many families half fought for each, and they weren't necessarily anti or pro-slavery. They just fought because they were supposed to fight, and they got involved in it that way. I'm going to tell you more about Robert E. Lee in just a second. Be right back.
You know, I was standing around the other day sticking a nail into my eye when I found myself wondering, how can I get this exact same experience without getting all this blood over my shirt? Then it came to me. It was time for another visit to our favorite website, Everyday Feminism. Hey, Everyday Feminism is the website that includes articles accompanied by an editor's note, and so help me, my hand to heaven, I am not making this up. Articles that are accompanied by an editor's note that warns readers, quote, "This article is written by a cisgender woman about the social expectations that she experiences having a vagina. Please keep in mind that not all women have vaginas, and not all people with vaginas are women, and their experiences may differ," unquote. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, whoa, that is so painfully stupid. Reading it felt almost like sticking a nail into my eye. So now you get the idea. Today's article from Everyday Feminism is called "You Don't Have to Hate Women to Be Sexist. Everyday Ways You May Be Sexist Without Knowing It." Now, of course, it's very true. You don't have to hate women to be sexist, but after reading this article, you probably will, so that should make things a lot easier. The article explains that even though you like women, and may even support one of them and help her raise the children she mysteriously keeps coming up with from somewhere, you may still be committing microaggressions against her by treating her as if she were a woman, instead of treating her like a man who, for some reason, keeps producing children through the vagina she may or may not have. Having this woman explain to you that you're committing microaggressions against her is very important because it reminds you that you may have forgotten to tell her to stop talking. Take a moment and tell her now, and the microaggressions will go away. According to the article, microaggressions may, quote, "take the form of jokes, like telling a woman to get back in the kitchen," unquote. Clearly, this illustrates a lack of communication between men and women, because apparently some women think this is a joke. That's why their men start getting hungry and cranky, which may explain some of the microaggression. This situation would be alleviated if the women would get back in the kitchen and make a damn sandwich. Actually, this is a very helpful article. Another common form of sexist microaggression, the article says, is chivalry. Acts of chivalry, like opening doors for women or paying for dinner, are, quote, "small acts of condescension steeped in assumptions that women are delicate, incapable, and need to be tended to," unquote. This, of course, is ridiculous. If women were delicate and needed to be tended to, they would go around blaming their unhappiness on make-believe acts of aggression no one else could see. And they would never do that, unless they were feminists, who, of course, are very delicate and need to be tended to. So, that's Everyday Feminism. You may now return to sticking a nail in your eye.
All right, we're halfway through here. Listening to Live with Lou if you stumbled here today. We've been talking about Robert E. Lee. My hunch is if we isolated all those leftist, communist Bolsheviks, Black Lives Matter people, and took them one-on-one and asked them to give us all they knew about Robert E. Lee, they would probably just say, I think he's a racist, so we need to tear down his statue. History actually says that Lee was very torn about the prospect of the South leaving the Union, even though he was their leading commander. And it maybe had something to do with who his wife was, because his wife's grandfather, as I mentioned in the last half hour, was George Washington. And Washington had a huge influence on Lee. He believed that ultimately states' rights trumped the federal government, and so he chose to lead the Southern Army. Now, many people today are feeling the same way. In fact, you have the Cal-Exit movement, and you have the Jefferson State movement. The Jefferson movement is not a movement to leave the Union, but it is definitely a movement to have more control over your destiny and not necessarily bend to every crazy rule the federal government comes up to. So you may not be that much different if you're a Jefferson State person or even a Cal-Exit person than Lee. In fact, you may be more wild than Lee was if you're a Cal-Exit person. So Lee's estate, which was Arlington, near Washington, D.C., was his home, and while away fighting the war, the federal government demanded that Lee himself pay his taxes in person. They knew that was impossible. He actually sent his wife, again, George Washington's granddaughter, but the money would not be accepted from a woman. Now hold that thought. So maybe we should tear down all men's statues. So when the government did not receive his taxes, the government began burying dead Union soldiers all over his land in Arlington. Today, they still bury soldiers there because it's called Arlington National Cemetery. Now, since it was Lee's property, should we now remove all that as well? Now, I want to, the hypocrisy here is so glaring that you realize, if you're a thinking person, that this is an attempt to overthrow the country. It has nothing to do with statues or racism or Ku Klux Klan. They keep bringing up about Trump being Ku Klux Klan. But one of the most famous senators, in fact, when he served, he was the oldest living senator, oldest serving senator. He's a guy named Robert Byrd, B-Y-R-D. He was a Grand Kleagle, or Kleagley, however you say it, K-L-E-A-G-L-E, and the Ku Klux Klan. He was the longest-serving Democrat senator in U.S. history until his death in 2010. Not one Democrat, in fact, Hillary Clinton considered him her chief mentor. Not one Democrat has ever been concerned about Robert Byrd's association, not just being a member. He was a leader in the Ku Klux Klan and proud of it and advocated it and spent 50 years in Congress, and nobody made an issue of it. Now, when you think about a friend of mine likes to travel, and one day we cross paths about once a year at his parents' house in town here in the Yuba City area, because his dad actually led me to Christ many years ago. So we actually have a meal together. Usually it's like an Easter or something meal, a holiday meal. And he likes to travel, and he showed me some photos of the pyramids of Egypt. And I was reminded that they were built by slaves, but as of yet, we're not disassembling them or disrespecting them. We call them a phenomenal accomplishment by whoever put them up. I don't know any family members who did that, but I've always thought it was kind of amazing. So now I just want to go over a few facts, because people get confused about this because we've been so propagandized about which party belongs to what decision making. There's an amazing photo of the 1924 Democrat Convention, and it is a massive march by the Ku Klux Klan, who are Democrats. They weren't of both parties. The Ku Klux Klan was they are sort of the Black Lives Matter of the Democrat Party back in the 20s and earlier than that. But in the 1924 Democrat Convention, they were really strutting their stuff, and they came out dressed in their white hooded garb and flexed their muscle at this convention that was conducted at Madison Square Garden in New York from June 24 to July 9 in 1924. Maybe that was where Democrat and former KKK leader Robert Byrd got his start. Why don't you Google the term Klan, not clam like C-L-A-M, like Mickey, but Klan, K-L-A-N, like in never. Google Klan bake, and you'll discover the authenticity of how involved the Democrat Party had been in launching the KKK. The Ku Klux Klan was resurrected after it was dying down about 2015, around the release of D.W. Griffith's very popular motion picture, The Birth of a Nation, And do you know who showed Birth of a Nation actually in the White House? That would be a famous progressive president that Democrats like to laud and praise by the name of Woodrow Wilson. It was not a conservative president. Then the 20th century, for you and all of us, that's the 1900s. The 20th century Ku Klux Klan was notoriously anti-Catholic, anti-Jew, or Semitic, in addition to being anti-black. You remember I said the Ku Klux Klan was the violent arm of the Democrat Party. They did not want blacks, who many of them were joining the Republicans and getting elected to office. They didn't like that. So they, in fact, you don't hear this much, or ever, that not only were blacks lynched, whites were lynched also because of their political persuasion. The Klan didn't like either. They hated Catholics, as I mentioned before. Klan advocates opposed those supporting Catholics from the major cities of the Northeast and Midwest. The tension between pro and anti-Klan delegates at the convention produced an intense and sometimes violent showdown. So we just had a violent showdown at Charlottesville. But in 1924, there was a violent showdown between convention attendees from the states of Colorado and Missouri. There were Klan and anti-Klan attendees among the delegates from Colorado and Missouri. Think about that. Klan delegates opposed the nomination of New York Governor Al Smith because Smith was a Roman Catholic. Smith campaigned against William Gibbs McAdoo, who had the support of most Klan delegates. The second dispute of the convention revolved, this is a Democrat convention, revolved around an attempt by non-Klan delegates led by Forney Johnston of Alabama to condemn the organization. In other words, there were people in the Democrat Party that condemned the Klan. The Klan prevailed in this convention, and they did not put a plank in the platform of the Democrat Party condemning the Klan. I want you to think about that. In light of what's going on today, the Democrats have always been the racist party. You may not agree with that, but you're not quoting history. This event of the outmaneuvering of the Klan, where they weren't thrown under the bus at the Democrat convention, this event that sprung from that was a celebration. After they won, the Klan won at this convention, they celebrated tens of thousands. I want you to think about that. Not just tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of hooded Klansmen. Like Black Lives Matter and all these Antifa groups, we're talking hundreds of people, of violent people like this that are paid to do this. In this case, these are people, loyal members that have been inducted into the Ku Klux Klan. Tens of thousands of hooded Klansmen rallied in a field in New Jersey across the river from New York City. This event where they burned crosses, you ever seen that? Burned crosses, urged violence and intimidation against African Americans and Catholics, and attacked effigies of their opponent, Smith. It's called the Klan Bake. Klanbake. Democrats love trying to pin racism on conservatives, but history does not support them in any aspect of that. His Democrat Party has always been the party of slavery and the party of racism an anti-civil rights party. They were behind the Jim Crow laws, which were laws trying to hold the black population down. Since its founding in the 1820s, the Democrat Party has defended slavery, started the Civil War, and opposed Reconstruction. Do you remember I said earlier that Robert E. Lee, who they just tore his statue down in a number of different places, he helped lead Reconstruction. The Democrat Party opposed Reconstruction. You see what I'm saying? The Democrat Party imposed segregation. They imposed separate bathrooms. You can't eat at the same restaurant in the same spot. You can't drink from the same water fountain. You can't enter through the same set of doors. You can't sit on the bus in the same area. The Democrat Party, its members engaged in lynchings of blacks and whites and opposed the Civil Rights Acts of the 1950s and the 1960s. During the Reconstruction, which Lee helped with, hundreds of black men were elected to Southern state legislatures. Now, I want you to think about that, because you think, oh, electing black people to office is kind of a recent thing. Honestly, there were many more in the early days. And we went backwards because of the Democrat purging of blacks out of the legislatures, not the Republicans. During Reconstruction, which Lee helped with and supported, hundreds of black men were elected to Southern state legislatures as Republicans, and 22 black Republicans served in the U.S. Congress by 1900 itself. A few decades later, the only serious congressional opposition to the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 came from Democrats. The only serious congressional opposition came from Democrats. 80% of Republicans in the House of Representatives supported the bill. Less than 70% of Democrats did. The Democrat Party did not elect a black man to Congress until 1935. I want you to think about that. That's the history. It's amazing to me. The only way that the blacks in this country could actually, have you ever heard of the Stockholm Syndrome? Look up Stockholm Syndrome. That's where you're abducted, like when Patty Hearst was abducted by the Symbionese Liberation Army, and she ended up fighting with them. That's a Stockholm Syndrome, where you get so twisted mentally in your captivity that you align yourself with your captives. The black people in this country are so discombobulated, it has to be a demonic deception to be able to align itself with the Democrat Party. Nearly 100% of them, it's over 90%. I think 94, 95% of black people that voted for Barack Obama, a Democrat. When the very party lynched them, segregated them, punished them, passed laws to hold them back. It's so amazing to me. The Democrat mentality is to blame and cry in front of its hurdles. The Republican perspective is to use those hurdles to become strong. People like Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and on and on and on. If they had had a message of we can do this, instead of a cry and blame and be a huckster, blacks would be in a lot different place. I want to just go over these facts. I know they're not teaching this in school anymore, but that's why people are so ignorant and think, oh, yeah, it's good. All those racists, what are those statues? All those racist statues. So I'll just go over the 13th Amendment of the United States abolished slavery. It got 100% Republican support, 23% Democrat support. The 14th Amendment gave citizenship. In other words, there's one thing to abolish slavery, but then what do these people do? Some people, like even Abe Lincoln, thought they should go back to Africa. Some people were involved in creating a new country in Africa called Liberia, or a place of liberty. And many of the streets in Liberia are named after presidents of the United States. And different people thought the blacks would want to go back to their home country after being punished so long in slavery, but they didn't. So the 14th Amendment gave citizenship to freed slaves. In other words, you're a citizen of the United States, even though you came from another country. We're giving you automatic citizenship. You know how many Republicans voted? 94% for that. You know how much percent got Democrats supported it? Zero. 15th Amendment. So you abolished slavery. You gave citizenship to freed slaves. How about the right to vote? The 15th Amendment. Republican support, 100%. Democrat support, not a one. What do you think about that? I want you to think about then something like Obamacare, that now is being defended as if it saved that people, as if people were dying in the streets before Obamacare. If you stop Obamacare, people will die in the streets. 86% support, 0 support, Republican support. Obamacare isn't even about health care. It's about control. If you control the education, if you control the health care, you control everything in this country. You'll change everything about this country. I want to share, I have a photo on my computer. You know what campaign buttons are? You ever seen people running for office and they'll have a campaign button, or they'll have their people that are helping them wear a button that has their name on it and what they're running for? I have campaign buttons on my computer screen, and it says, this is Re-elect Obama 2012. It has a picture of Barack Obama and some writing. And you know what the flag is? It's not an American flag. It's a Confederate flag on Barack Obama's button that now is so... It's just so evil, the Confederate flag. But he has a Confederate flag, not an American flag. And it is his Re-elect Obama 2012, his little logo. Do you know Hillary Clinton, when she just ran for president, 2016? She has a button that has, it's the entire button. Remember the H she had with the kind of pointed to the one side going forward or something? It has the stars and stripes of the Confederate flag, not the American flag on it. Hillary Clinton, 2 years, just a year and a half ago. And then there's also one that says, Arkansas travelers in support of Hillary Clinton for president, South Carolina, 2008. And that has a button with all the logo of the Confederate flag. And then if you go back to 1992, you find Bill Clinton and Albert Gore running together. And it has the XX of the stars, blue and red, or kind of orange, of the Confederate flag. It's definitely Confederate flag made into a logo for Clinton Gore. Now, are you seeing the hypocrisy and the gamesmanship? This is about stirring up people that don't know what they're doing. I understand this. I was in college when the whole civil rights movement was stirred up, and there was all kinds of issues going on a college campus, and I got caught up in some of that. And I hardly knew anything about anything. So I am well aware that people get caught up in movements, and they have no idea what they're doing. Now I want to talk to you about some other, if we're going to start tearing down stuff, there's some memorials and namesakes established for Andrew Johnson, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and Robert Byrd. These 5 men had 2 things in common. All had a penchant for racism to one degree or another, and all were Democrats. Did you hear what I said? Andrew Johnson, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, and Robert Byrd. Some are monuments. Some have groves of trees devoted to them. Others have highways, bridges, colleges, cemeteries. Abraham Lincoln chose Johnson as his running mate in 1864 because Lincoln's reelection hopes hinged on him being able to attract some racist Democrat voters to his side. Lincoln was a Republican, Johnson a Democrat. The plan worked and Lincoln was reelected. However, following Lincoln's assassination, the oversight of the post-Civil War policy for the South fell to Johnson, who believed the South ought to be able to make its own course. So during his administration, Johnson, who took over for an assassinated Lincoln, Civil War Democrats enacted the Black Codes of the South, which were precursors to the Jim Crow laws they would implement in the 20th century. The Black Codes served to prevent freed slaves from experiencing the fullness of freedom. Johnson today is honored with the Andrew Johnson National Historic Site and National Cemetery in Greenville, Tennessee. How about Woodrow Wilson, who many Democrats love to call Mr. Progressive? He was tolerable of blacks and interested in their plight when running for election, but he made little effort to help better their condition as the 20th century made it into the second decade, right? That would be the 1920s that I just told you about, where they had the big Ku Klux Klan rally at the 1924 Democrat convention. John Milton Cooper wrote, Wilson believed blacks were not innately inferior to whites and would in 2 or 3 centuries achieve a measure of economic and political, if not social equality. 2 or 3 centuries. However, Cooper explained that these views had little impact on Wilson's behavior. President of Princeton, a position he held prior to being president of the United States. Princeton had a long-standing ban on admitting blacks. Hold that thought. We'll be right back. I want to tell you about the rest of these characters that we like, but were racist.
Rising up from the Mexican desert, an oasis for dental care.
The Monarch City. Here we are, waiting for you all.
Los Algodones, Mexico, better known as Molar City, is the self-proclaimed dental capital of the world. In this small community of just 5,000 people, there are more than 600 dentists working in some 300 clinics. And they are everywhere. Their patients?
From Mesa, Arizona.
Palmdale, California.
Mississippi.
A staggering 114 million Americans lack dental insurance. Many are coming here as a last resort.
I have friends who couldn't believe it.
Retired teacher Roberta Jones couldn't afford treatment back home in Arizona.
How does it make you feel as an American that you have to go to another country to get affordable care that you need? I think it's very sad because I really do think everybody should have medical care.
I might need to get you numb for this.
Dr. Ever has seen a 40% increase in the number of American patients this year.
So you guys are seeing some of the worst cases here.
Definitely. We do a CT scan, we give him treatment plans, multiple options, totally normal dental practice.
And at much lower prices because of lower labor, real estate, and malpractice costs. Brian Curry and his wife Teresa traveled more than 1,000 miles to save $35,000 on dental implants.
It's literally a huge cost savings.
Friends and family were more than a little skeptical.
They all go like, really? What are you thinking? And we just tell them we've done our research.
In the winter months, up to 7,000 Americans a day travel to Los Algodones, many of them attracted by the great dental deals advertised online.
I'm a happy camper. I can do this.
Inside the clinics, the waiting rooms are packed. That's where we met Anne-Marie Lee from Connecticut.
When they put the teeth in my mouth the other day, I just smiled and I was like, wow. I just can't believe it.
Do you feel like yourself again?
I feel like I can open my mouth and smile and talk to you and not.
A life-changing experience in a place where you'd least expect it. A risk more and more Americans are willing to take. Lucy Kaufman of NBC News, Los Algodones, Mexico.
We reached out to the American Dental Association about this story. By the way, its recommendation, patients should do their research. The organization says there are good and bad dentists everywhere.
All right, we're into our last hour. You're listening to Lou Benninger, Live with Lou, and you just heard a clip there about Los Algodones. And America, through its stupidity and government interference, is pricing itself out of taking care of people, and people are getting surgeries all over the world. In fact, I nearly flew to Bangkok to get a surgery done, and it's called a 5-star hospital there. And actually, I've mentioned before, I've got an MRI done in Vietnam for $130 that a surgeon here in the U.S. thought was great service and a great quality MRI on my shoulder. So I've actually entertained going to Mexico, although I haven't yet, but friends of mine have, to get dental work done. Also have a couple friends who have the hospital I mentioned in Bangkok, Thailand. They had their eyes lasered. Remember when the laser eye work still started, where you wore glasses, and they'd eliminate you wearing glasses by lasering your eyes. And I have two friends that got that done while traveling to Asia for other purposes. They stopped and laid over in Bangkok and had their eyes lasered for a pittance compared to what you'd pay here. So I mentioned at the last segment, and I'm going to continue on with some of the folks that are high-profile Americans in politics that are racist, and nobody's fussing with them. But I want to mention something again, that whoever controls the school system will control the future of this country. And I want to play a clip here that because normally most of our kids go into colleges, and if they're conservative or even spiritual kids, usually they get that removed on their way through college. But this clip is "College Made Me a Conservative."
Have you ever heard the old saying that a conservative is just a liberal who got mugged? Well, I got mugged to the tune of $60,000 a year. It's called tuition. Like everyone who cons themselves into attending a liberal arts college, I was captivated by the idea of changing the world. I would immerse myself in a diverse pool of academic thought, theory, and action. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. Over the course of 4 years, I was transformed from a plucky, free-thinking, free spirit into a cranky, get-off-my-lawn conservative. The process started not long after I arrived at my elite East Coast school. I thought I was there to expand my knowledge of the world, to debate the great ideas. I soon realized, however, that my professors had something else in mind. Invariably, each class followed the same monotonous ritual. Identify a problem, say racism, blow it up beyond all proportion, blame the problem on the white majority culture, and then offer an unworkable solution, usually involving the government. Everywhere I turned, I saw political correctness. At first, I just rolled with it. Then I got annoyed. Then it started to tick me off. I was being brainwashed, indoctrinated, and I was paying for the privilege with borrowed money. Almost every speaker who came to campus was a leftist journalist, a leftist activist, or a leftist professor from another leftist school. The ones who weren't leftists were just weird. One time, I attended a film lecture given by a very skilled paraplegic adult film star who showed us some of her art. Another time, I went to a performance given by a woman who engaged in autoeroticism behind a curtain. I couldn't deal with it. The PC culture, the mono-thinking, the weirdness. I needed some way to cope. So I got high almost every day. Parenthetically, most of the worst stoners I knew are now working in finance or politics. In fact, this is what made me first realize that I was a fan of limited government. I do not trust these goofs to make policy. Their power must be constrained. This brings me to another black hole in the college experience: useless majors, the only thing more pervasive than marijuana and irresponsible future leaders. I'm not being judgmental here. I have a degree in film and media studies and political science. Why did I choose them? They're subjects I like talking about. Practical, right? But I wasn't alone. Most of my peers also chose to spend their student loan money on subjects better learned on YouTube or Turner Classic Movies. By the time graduation approached, none of us had developed any actual job skills. And people want to raise taxes to pay for free college for everyone? Are you kidding me? No, just no. I'd only give a free education to a smart kid who promised to get a degree in whatever the exact opposite of my degree is. And that degree didn't come cheap. I took on tens of thousands of dollars of debt, but never spent a minute learning how to manage it. No such classes were even offered. I might have actually learned something useful if they had been. I didn't learn about taxes either, other than that the rich should pay their fair share. It was only after college, when I was lucky enough to get my first job, that I discovered the truth. The government takes away a lot of your money. Frankly, it's shocking. And that's not even counting the mandatory $400 a month deduction for my student loans. I'll probably have that albatross around my neck for the rest of my life. Really, I can't believe my peers and I spent so much time shaming conservatives for wanting to lower taxes. A past version of myself would call this desire to keep what I earn selfish. The current, cheerfully realistic version of me knows this: I can spend my money much better than the politically correct stoners who are running the government can. So I guess, in a roundabout way, I did get something of value out of my expensive liberal arts education after all. Common sense.
So I want to pick back up where I left off. I talked about Franklin Roosevelt, and I want to talk about Lyndon Baines Johnson. He is the president who took over for John Kennedy, who was assassinated. You remember we talked about Andrew Johnson, who took over for Lincoln, who was assassinated. Lincoln being a Republican. Johnson, who was a racist. Johnson and Kennedy were both Democrats, but Johnson definitely was a racist and frequently referred to black people as niggers. And while discussing civil rights legislation with men like Mississippi Democrat James Easton, who committed most of his life to defending white supremacy, LBJ simply called Easton's bill the nigger bill. Before Johnson was president, he was running, I believe, for Senate from Texas. He was having a tough race, and many of the black congregations in his district were organizing to vote against him. Johnson, who was already a senator but was running for re-election, got a bill passed that I believe has not been changed, although Donald Trump talked about changing it, which limited the free speech of churches. And it said that a church could not, they could politic regarding legislation, but they couldn't take a stand or speak publicly regarding candidates. They got that law passed specifically to help Lyndon Johnson win and to restrict the black congregation's ability to have free speech and in other words, to limit their civil rights. If they violated that law, they would lose their 501c3 designation and nonprofit status. That law still has been in effect. Again, Donald Trump has talked about eliminating that law. But that's Lyndon Baines Johnson. And LBJ is honored with the Lyndon Baines Johnson Memorial Grove on the Potomac, or Potomac, however you want to say it, River. I mentioned earlier Senator Robert Byrd. This guy is an amazing, amazing guy who was called an exalted cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan. He later apologized numerous times for what he considered youthful indiscretion. And his early votes in Congress against blacks, his filibuster against the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Byrd has been honored by at least 8 highways or bridges throughout West Virginia. There's other memorials like the Robert C. Byrd Expressway, Robert C. Byrd Bridge in Ohio County, Robert C. Byrd Highway, Robert C. Byrd Appalachian Highway System, Robert C. Byrd Appalachian Highway System, Robert C. Byrd Bridge in Huntington, Robert C. Byrd Interchange. You know, are we going to tear up all these highways and bridges? Or are we going to change the names of all of them? Because this guy was a full-blown racist. It's something to think. Honestly, when you think about all this, folks, you got to realize that this is, if you still listen to television, honestly, you are infecting yourself with an agenda to overthrow this country. If you think there's any balanced or fair news by any station at this point, you're just missing it. These people don't like the United States of America as it was designed in the Constitution. They don't believe in the Constitution. They don't want the Constitution. Eventually, it will be considered a racist document because people that actually wrote it and endorsed it, some of them were slave owners. That would disqualify it in some people's minds. So on we go, and we're until people like Barack Obama drop dead, he will be investing his life, and Eric Holder types of this world will invest their lives in the overthrow of this government. That's what this is all about. It's not about statues. It's not about purging all the racists because they pick and choose what they want to do. It's really about destroying a presidency. Donald Trump is nowhere a racist, nowhere involved in the Ku Klux Klan. The words he uses, he criticized both sides of this latest issue in Charlottesville, and Barack Obama literally got a pass by the media by complimenting criminals, complimenting blacks that were out of control, complimenting Black Lives Matter. Think about it. This is an agenda that's being driven. So that's it. I'm going to leave it with that. I noticed an article by in the city council of Marysville talking about the fact that they now have eliminated in their codes, their local city codes, any obeyance of state and federal laws. They don't have to match up their codes with state and federal laws, and they did that so they could pass their marijuana dispensary law. And the one comment they made in there on the justification for that is they didn't have the staff or the ability to keep up with all the rules and laws of the land. And I thought that's kind of amazing because they do have a staff, and they also, I mean, this is an example of somebody shoving manure over the top of you. They have a law firm on retainer that they spend about $10,000 a month. Now, you'd think that law firm, if they were going to pass a law, that law firm could do a little research. Now, I understand that back in the days before computers, you actually had to have some knowledge about where to check out laws that you think, oh, if we pass this law, it's going to conflict with that law. Now, even unintelligent people like myself, who's a school dropout, we can Google it and kind of look up a bunch of stuff really quick to see whether we're out of line. But that article in the Appeal Democrat was an example of deception by the City Council of Marysville in explaining or justifying a decision they made to ignore federal and state laws and just inflict upon the public any law they wanted to inflict upon us, which was dispensaries. That both Pedigo and Slick Willie Simmons have commented that all it's about for them is making money for the city. As Dale Whitmore commented that he thought marijuana was bad for kids and it was going to introduce more problems for the city. Willie Simmons, flip-flopper, said that he believed that it was all about money. And Chris Pedigo said he knew someone that actually benefited medical marijuana, so that was good enough for him. So he was going to have dispensaries, period. So I was out in front of the house last night. I live in downtown Marysville, and I was comparing notes with my neighbor across the street on how our neighborhood has changed. And Jim Whitaker had written an article for the I guess it's going to appear in both Territorial Dispatch and the Appeal Democrat. I already showed it in the Appeal, where he justifies the giving homeless people their way in the city with a federal judge's decision that if we didn't have enough shelters to house anybody that doesn't have a shelter, then we have to give them some open space. It's interesting to me how politicians pick and choose which laws they want to obey. For instance, right now, many of the state legislators are choosing to ignore federal law and call themselves a sanctuary city or cities and ultimately a sanctuary state, which will, so it's like in some ways we got to obey the state. Like if they pass a sanctuary state rule, then it may shut down our housing of immigration detainees at the Yuba County Sheriff's Department. So there they want us to obey the state, but then they, in other situations, they don't want to obey the federal government because they don't want to assist ICE, immigration, the immigration system we have. So they pick and choose. So in this case, local folks, one judge makes a decision that you got to provide free open spaces to homeless folks. And we kowtow to that, right? And so we allow them to panhandle, pollute, spread garbage, steal stuff. Don't do anything about it. I got a kick out of reading this article about there's a pilot program in Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County may be leading the charge in funding the homeless. So now, if you're in Los Angeles County and you're willing to share your home with a homeless person or build an addition in the back, they will help pay for it. And you could receive up to $75,000 to build a second dwelling in areas zoned for such structures, while others may get $50,000 to update and legalize an existing dwelling if you'll take in homeless people. I thought, man, I got friends that are taking in homeless people and they don't get a nickel. They just do it because it's a nice thing to do to help people out. So it says homelessness spiked 23% across Los Angeles County's neighborhoods and suburbs this year compared with 2016. It's interesting that coincided with more spending on homeless. It's like the more we spend, the more we get. Seemed like, I think there's a principle there in economics. If you want more of something, subsidize it. If you want less of something, tax it. So Los Angeles city and county voters passed 2 bond measures recently, which shows how stupid people can get. A parcel tax to raise $1.2 billion for the construction of 10,000 units of housing to help homeless. And Measure H, a quarter-cent sales tax to raise $355 million for 10 years to help homeless people transition to planned affordable housing. Something to think about. We'll be right back. Oh, I thought we were out of time. We got time?
Nevada, home of casinos, impulse weddings, legal brothels, and, as of July 1st, recreational marijuana. The truth is, the state has never been anything close to a free market paradise. Everything from the Las Vegas taxi industry to prostitution is controlled by a handful of politically connected companies licensed to operate by the government. This means exorbitant prices and unnecessary hassles for customers and businesses. The latest industry to take hold here, legal weed, is no exception. Governor Brian Sandoval recently declared a state of emergency because Nevada's 37 licensed marijuana shops are running out of inventory. How could that be? The law legalizing weed in Nevada also granted an 18-month monopoly on distribution to liquor companies. Not only do alcohol wholesalers lack the experience or infrastructure to transport marijuana, most are too afraid to even enter the market because they're regulated by the federal government and marijuana is still considered illegal on the federal level.
And there isn't a shortage of cannabis as much as there is a shortage of distributors.
Armin Yemenijan, the owner of Essence, a marijuana dispensary just north of the Vegas Strip, started out running a facility for medical marijuana, which was legalized in Nevada back in 2015. When he was dealing with medical cannabis, his employees simply moved inventory from the grow house to the storefront themselves. Now that Essence is selling recreational marijuana, that's no longer an option.
Our cultivation facility is no more than a couple miles from our dispensary. Even worse, there are some cultivations that are in the same building as the dispensaries.
The medical market faced other regulatory hurdles, which is one reason the line on the medical side of the store has nobody standing in it.
If you're using the penetration rates from other states, we should have had 50 to 60,000 medical patients. The process of obtaining a card and that you were in the state's database and that you couldn't have a CCW, and the fact that sometimes it took patients up to 6 months to get a card really discouraged a lot of patients from getting their medical cards.
Yemenijan says he's managed to work out a temporary deal with a liquor distributor to keep his shelves stocked for the time being. But other stores are running dangerously low on inventory. The state is trying to devise a workaround that would allow some marijuana sellers to move their own product again. Recreational marijuana has the potential to provide visitors to Sin City an especially fun and safe way to enjoy themselves. And it could be a huge boon to the state economy, but it won't live up to its full potential until politicians stop using every vice as a means to reward special interests.
You have to treat it like any other business. It doesn't make sense to over-regulate because at that point, all that cost is passed on to the consumer. If the prices were a little lower, you'd probably take away from the black market as opposed to giving people a reason to go to the black market.
All right, welcome back. You know, Jeff Sessions, who was brought in from being a senator from the state of Alabama to be the attorney general for President Trump, left a spot there, and a guy named Luther Strange was appointed to take his spot. But Strange is, from what I understand, kind of a rhino, Republican in name only, which most of them, frankly, are. There's really only one party back there, with a couple of exceptions on the Republican side. But so he's now up for election, and there was a three-way race, and there was a guy named Morris running, and then a guy that I had overlooked, Roy Moore, was running. And he has had an amazing history there. He's called the horse-riding, 10 Commandments defending judge, and he's running. So in the three-way race, Moore actually came out on top, and it's now a runoff. So I don't know whether you remember Roy Moore, but he'd been removed as a Chief Justice of Alabama's Supreme Court not once but twice, and famously referred to as the 10 Commandments judge. He traditionally rides a horse to the polls on Election Day. So there's a September 26th runoff. You might keep that in mind. You might want to give money to Roy Moore if you want a true conservative in every sense of the word, as opposed to Luther Strange. And most of the big money, the Republican Party money from the institution called the Republican Party, will go to Strange because they want mediocrity. But you could give to Roy Moore. Just Google Roy Moore for Senate, Alabama, and donate some money to him. So let me give you a sense of who this Roy Moore is. Former Alabama Chief Justice and U.S. Senate candidate Roy Moore rides in on a horse named Sassy to vote at the Gallant Volunteer Fire Department. So some people think he might be a favorite to win. But let me give you a little history. In the 1990s, he was a country judge when he hung a wooden 10 Commandments plaque on the wall of his courtroom, and the ACLU filed a lawsuit against him. He was just like a Superior Court judge. Benefiting from his popularity at that time, Moore then ran and won a race for Chief Justice of the state's Supreme Court in 2000. So much for doing the right thing, right? Getting blessed. But then he was ousted from that position after refusing to remove a 5,280-pound granite 10 Commandment monument from the rotunda. He didn't put it there, but he refused to remove it of the state judicial building. So he got removed because he refused to obey folks that wanted him to remove it. He resurrected his political career in 2012, getting elected to the Chief Justice spot once again after he was forcefully removed. But his tenure was short-lived again because in 2016, Moore was suspended as Chief Justice after he directed probate judges. Probate judges are those that take care of the affairs of someone after they die. After he directed probate judges not to issue marriage certificates to gay couples, because I guess they were using them for that at that time. So they removed him from the Supreme Court once again. So even though he's been removed, which is kind of a black mark, right? His popularity continues to go up because his stances are supported or believed in by many people. Moore is seen as sacrificing himself for a higher justice. Moore is portraying himself on the campaign trail as anti-establishment, which would be a Trump stance, although Trump actually in the primary election endorsed Luther Strange, who ran second in that election. Who knows what Trump's going to do? I guess he congratulated both Strange and Moore. But it'll be interesting in September. I think it's September 26th, as I mentioned. So if you want to help a guy that's anti-establishment conservative, you might want to give some money to Chief Justice Roy Moore. I wanted to mention trauma intervention program because this next month in September, we're going to be doing our annual fundraiser. Normally what we do towards the end of the month of September, we do a dinner fundraiser, which was started about 12 years ago by a guy named Warren Miller, who was captain for Yuba City Fire Department. And at that time, the fire department of Yuba City did a lot of the heavy lifting for this tri-tip fundraiser for us. And so most of everything was donated, even the building, the cooking, a lot of the food. So most everything that we earned from sales of tickets to raffles to silent auctions all went to support our work with going out on 911 calls, helping people traumatized by terrible incidences. TIP has been here since '94 and done over 10,000 responses, and we do it all with volunteers, so we don't have any administrative salaries. All the money is used for maintenance of the program, training, office supplies, technology, computers, cell phones, dispatch. There's some cost. People think, oh, well, if it's nonprofit, why are there any costs? Well, that's not really, obviously, you've never worked in a nonprofit. So it takes us around $50,000 to run right now. Should take us about $50,000. And if at this point, I run the program, but eventually, if they hire somebody to replace me, it will probably push it to $70,000 and up with insurances and payroll taxes and all that kind of stuff to hire people. So at this time, I do it for nothing, but they say that I'm going to get eternal life, but it's not all going to be here. So if you're interested, if you know anything about trauma intervention, we serve Yuba, Sutter counties. So if you're out there in Placer, Nevada, Butte, all those counties, all those counties have been interested in TIP but never started it. We were the 8th program nationally to launch TIP, and started down in San Diego County. It's in Orange County, Riverside County, Corona, California as well. So if you're interested and you want to help us, we exist off people that want us to exist. In other words, we don't force, like taxes, we're not forcing anybody to help us. We don't take money from people and then give it to somebody else. So we just run on people that want to see us run. So I was out at East Necklace Fire Department the other night doing a debriefing because they had some bad calls, and one of the questions they had at the end is, Lou, tell us how TIP exists. And I said, it exists because you want it to or don't want it to. Depends on what you want. So we'll be talking about it on this program more in the coming weeks. And I'm going to tell you a variety of ways you can give to us. We're going to do an online auction. We're going to do an online where you could just donate some money. You could donate stuff for an online auction. We're looking for things to like trips, cabins, experiential type things to do an auction, silent auction with. We'll do it online, so you can just go online and bid. We're also probably going to get some, we haven't got them yet, but usually we get some airline tickets to auction off, Disney tickets, and we're going to raffle off a gun as well, handgun. But you can go to Yuba Sutter Tip, all one word, Yuba Sutter Tip, no hyphens, no periods, .org. Or you can go and donate online at YouCaring, all one word, youcaring.com/tip. It's kind of like a GoFundMe, but they don't take hardly any money from you, and it's more designed for good causes as opposed to just give Lou some money. Like GoFundMe, it's not GoFundMe. This is youcaring.com/tip, and you can get involved in donating to TIP. There's also ways that you can get your friends to help and get a kind of a chain link donation system to help TIP. Again, all the money goes to help our clients, children through adults, all groups. There is nobody that's a human being. We even help some animals. All human beings we help, doesn't matter what flavor they are, what size they are, what age they are, we help them all. And we also worked with all the emergency responders in the Yuba Center area. That's all fire departments, all law enforcement departments, and the hospital system, and Bi-County Ambulance, to take some pressure off them, to help a lot of people that are on scene that they can't get to because they're trying to keep people alive or get people off the roadway, get the roadway cleared up. They got a lot of pressure on them, so we handle all the extra people. So if you're interested in us, or you could dial me up, you want to talk about a donation at 713-1838. It's 713-1838, 530 area code. And if you have something you'd like to give, like a thing or in-kind service. But we're not going to do a dinner this year. This is what we're going to do. It's going to be an annual fundraising effort. I think we'll do fine. And it's called, so you can go to yubacettertip.org. That's our website. There's also, if you've had a tragedy in your family and maybe you didn't get the benefit of TIP, maybe there's not a TIP in your area, you can go to our resources page. Just when you go to yubacettertip.org, you look up at the top and just click on resources and scroll down. You can look and you can either print off or read right online a lot of helpful ideas about how to take care of yourself, and it talks about what it's like to grieve after the loss of a loved one. So that's yubacettertip.org, or you can go online at youcaring.com/TIP, tip. All right, that's that. Let's see, what else? Let's see. Okay. I also want to mention, did you notice on Facebook and in the paper, there was an incident in Yuba City where Taco Bell, somebody was causing a disturbance at Taco Bell. I don't know all the gory details. I haven't talked to Taco Bell. But they called the police, and a police officer responded. And they met a guy there that was the fellow that Taco Bell called about that was creating a disturbance. A large gentleman by the name of Ron Ibarra, according to the photo in the Appeal Democrat and on Facebook. And someone, like a lot nowadays, someone was there watching this intervention by the police officer at the request of Taco Bell. The cop approached Mr. Ibarra, and I looked at the clip several times. It looked like Mr. Ibarra reached behind him to grab something out of his pocket or something. But the officer then hit him in the face and grabbed him around the top part of his body, around his shoulders, and took him down. And what's typical of Facebook now is we have a whole demographic in the United States of what I call Facebook criminologists. So they not only can solve a crime, like on television in 30 minutes or an hour, solve a murder from start to finish in an hour, but in just a 10-second or 15-second or 20-second clip, they can determine the entire cause, fault, consequences, etc., of an intervention of a cop. And I get a kick out of some of them because it shows a cop wrestling a guy, and you don't know actually who's going to win, but the film people don't even interfere. I mean, if the cop gets killed, he gets killed. It's like the survival of the fittest. They don't see themselves as having any responsibility to help the police officer. So anyway, all these Facebook criminologists begin to criticize this cop as, this taking down this poor guy. Well, Ibarra has a lengthy criminal history. But even if he did have a lengthy criminal history, that doesn't mean he was wrong that day, right? Frequently, being a rider in many police cars over the years, if someone was violent or may have brass knuckles or may have a weapon, dispatch would tell us on the way to the call the person may be armed, right? So you got a heads up. Or if the person has a history of violence, they know them. Dispatch knows them. They will tell you this person has a history of resisting or violence, right? So when the officer got there, he took him down and made the arrest. But because of the dust-up on Facebook, he was released, and as far as I could tell, is not being charged. Now, it's interesting because when I saw it on Facebook, an old friend of mine that when I say friend, I mean I consider him a friend, although we've never done anything together, but he was actually chief of Marysville Police Department when I was asked to be chaplain. He was chief, and Mark Siemens was the lieutenant or second chief. So I have a lot of respect for Jack Simpson or John Simpson, and he retired from Marysville Police and still lives here in the area. But he went on Facebook when people were starting to snipe at the cop and said that it was a righteous takedown. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because from that little clip that I saw, the chief, who was trained in what's lawful and what's legitimate and what's correct, could see enough by that to say it was a righteous takedown. And my understanding is that the Yuba City Police Department, in their review of it, consider it a textbook takedown, and the guy resisted arrest. So there's a discussion that's continuing on in the community, like why the district attorney isn't pressing charges against this guy. So I hope they do, because ultimately this is the type of thing that undermines law enforcement in the area. I heard many law enforcement officials are upset that the guy was released. So I don't know whether there's some details that need to be finished out in the report. I don't really know. And a lot of times these situations, nobody wants to talk over there at the police department. They don't want to talk because it's an open case. It's kind of like when the other day, last week I made the comment that some folks say when you want to know why things ended up happening the way they happened, you need to follow the money. Well, I brought up there's another term of you need to follow the sperm. Like if you know who's having sex with who, you can figure out sometimes why politics ends up the way it ends up. I'll give you an example. Kevin McCarthy from California is a congressman that was probably going to be the next Speaker of the House before Paul Ryan. But he got taken out because of a sexual relationship with the congresswoman from, I believe, South or North Carolina, Renee Elmers, a pretty nurse type. The same way with Chad Mays down at the Capitol, who kind of screwed his way to the top by having relations with some of the top Republican, or one of the top Republican ladies. So when I mentioned that, I guess somebody paid attention to it and was a little stirred up about it. A couple of years ago now, we had a situation with Lewis McElfresh, who was a captain at the Sutter County Jail, who was having all kinds of sexual relations with people in the community, and his daughter, he was farming his daughter out. At about the same time, the city police chief now of Marysville, Aaron Eason's wife, died from a gunshot to the head. The odd thing is about the whole thing, you know, whenever, like with trauma intervention, we do about 2 or 3 suicides a month where we respond to people hanging, or somebody shot themselves, or they cut their wrists, or took an overdose of pills, or whatever. It's a very sad situation, very traumatic situation for everybody involved. But every time law enforcement, and all law enforcement knows this, the way they go into those cases is they rule out homicide first. That's the first thing they have to rule out. They just don't accept the fact it's a suicide because somebody said, oh, I think they took their own life. But the fact is, during that investigation of the chief's wife dying, they learned that there's a whole bunch of people in Sutter County government that are all having sex with each other. Now, that's a bad sign, people. Now, usually who you have sex with is of your own business. But unless you're married to somebody and then you're having sex with somebody else, and sometimes you're doing that without the knowledge of your spouse, and then that's lying and breaking a trust. So then you have to ask the question, if they're willing to deceive their own wife, why wouldn't they deceive you on decisions made about the city or the county? But then the problem comes up is if people are having sex with other partners with their wife's consent, that's even more screwy, right? They call them swingers. In other words, you make a commitment, you marry your wife or husband, and you commit yourself to be faithful to them, but pretty soon you decide that your sexual experiences aren't sufficient in your marriage, so you want to go and entertain others. Now, that's one thing when you have a society that does that, but when you have it in your leadership of your community, you got to stop and think what impact that's going to have. For instance, we had a deputy of the Sheriff's Department of Sutter County having sex with an attorney in the district attorney's office. And then when there's a case of domestic violence against the deputy, against his own wife, it gets a little complicated over there in the district attorney's office of Sutter County. You with me? This was in the interim between Carl Adams leaving or resigning and Amanda Hopper being arrested. But the point is that when people don't behave themselves, I'm talking about character here. When people are not honest, people of integrity, and they're messing with other people's women or men, it complicates the carrying out of the people's business. And sometimes it gets people killed. Just a thought. It's interesting, all the other pressures that come in that prevent us from having justice and to judge righteously. A lot of times people choose their careers over the people's good. You get that? They choose their careers over the people's good. They would rather see themselves get elected than they would do the right thing and maybe cause them not to get elected. My feeling is, hey, if you're a God-fearing person, you do the right thing, and however it shakes down, God will provide another option for you if it isn't to be reelected again. But it's interesting how things shake down when you wonder why. Well, I don't wonder, but I want you to. There's reasons why one city flourishes and another doesn't, and one city has righteous judgment and another doesn't. And when you have people lying on city councils and supervisors and things weird happening between folks, you have problems. So we got this sports talk show coming up right after me, and I like this show, and I think you will too. It's on for a couple hours. These guys do a good job. It's interesting. Football's about ready to start, and basketball's not too far behind it. But football, everybody's getting all jacked up about football. So hang on and listen. So we'll be back next week, and Leon is just got a few weeks left, and he's going to leave California. That's going to be one less person getting kicked around by this government. So Leon's heading south. And so have a good week. God bless you guys.